So we call it content, community, and coaching. So in the year 2019 was when I was diagnosed with an autoimmune issue, right? And that started to take a big toll on my physical, my mental health, my relationships, just every area of my life went for a toss. I think I have the experience now to start something. We realized that almost 25 to 30% of the mental health market would actually comprise of individuals from the LGBT community. And I think I'm really passionate about mental health. That passion has to see you through. It's a 5 to 10 year journey. There'll be ups and downs. It's not going to be motivating enough for you on your bad days. It's probably not the best idea to start exploring your own identity. Same way for the LGBT community, when you're looking at mainstream cinema, mainstream pop culture, and you're seeing, heterosexual couples everywhere. I think being honest is the second part. Be honest with yourself. Evolve is born.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of Behind the Feature. Today I'm joined by Anshul, who actually is the founder of Evolve, a mental wellness app that is the LGBTQ plus community. Anshul, welcome to the episode. It's great having you here. He's actually flown down from Delhi. So excited.
Thank you, Diksha.
Why don't you share a bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me and congrats on starting this podcast. Currently, I'm the founder of Evolve. Probably the most exciting thing I've done in my career, jumping in and actually building a startup. Before that, I started my career very far from this. I was actually in corporate in London working for Shell, oil and gas. So I did a couple of stints in Scotland and in London. And yeah, it couldn't be further from what I'm doing right now. So, getting into this large office every day, wearing suits, working in finance, the big city life, living comfortably, all of that. And yeah, now I'm living in a flat where the flat doubles up as my office. So I'm living and breathing work, but I've got a beautiful team around me, an incredible team that's really passionate. And in between this, there were a couple of steps, that I've not mentioned. So the first thing I did was actually I moved back to India without knowing what I was going to do. So after 3.5 years of working for Shell, I decided that that's not what I wanted ultimately in my career. So moved back to India. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, so I joined an early stage startup, which was into technology. So the team was less than 10 people. So I got to work with the CEO, got to work on funding rounds, got to work on understanding tech, product, data. So that was great startup experience for me. And while I was doing that, I think there was this really beautiful parallel journey that started around my own mental health. So it started where there was actually a workshop I attended, which was developed by Google. It's called Search Inside Yourself. And that combines a lot of mindfulness, neuroscience, and self awareness. And, here I was, this 25-year-old who had just quit corporate life, at Shell. And I'd never stopped to really think inwards, right? So those 2 days were absolutely mind-blowing, where I was learning why I do certain things, why I think certain ways, stopping to actually tune into my own emotions, how I'm feeling. And that was my first tryst or my first brush with just emotional health or mental health in general. I then started facilitating workshops for others. So purely as a passion project, I think I was so taken aback by how some of those modules and what I'd learned had helped me. So on weekends, one fine day at Dulali in Bombay, I decided, okay, let's just host a workshop. 15 in a beer brewery, because that was the only place that was willing to give us space.
Oh wow!
So yeah, we hosted a workshop. 15 people showed up. And then we kept that going. So almost every weekend I would collaborate with a psychologist, with a wellness expert, and just hold these workshops. And so it was this 2-year journey of really imbibing a lot of whether it's lessons, whether it's frameworks, how do you facilitate from these people I was working with. And I think the final straw, so I knew I was really passionate about it, but the final straw was actually when I had my own mental health struggles. So in the year 2019 was when I was diagnosed with an autoimmune issue, right? And that started to take a big toll on my physical, my mental health, my relationships, just every area of my life went for a toss. And I think all these experiences came together. And as I started bouncing back, I was like, you know what? I think I have the experience now to start something. And I think I'm really passionate about mental health, enough because when you're starting something, that passion has to see you through. It's a 5 to 10 year journey. There'll be ups and downs. So, if it's not going to be motivating enough for you on your bad days, it's probably not the best idea to start that, right? So that's kind of how Evolve was born.
My God, I think, Anshul, first of all, I want to thank you for being so honest about sharing your story. It's very hard for people, especially, in India. I think the topic is such a taboo, and we actually had somebody from the design world come in, and they said immediately the word mental health in India has such a big negative
Yeah.
connotation. Can you share a bit about? So you did get us started on how Evolve was born, but how is it that you actually evolved it into an app which is for the LGBTQ
Yeah.
plus community?
Yeah, so I think our journey began with us not really segmenting the market in any way. So we knew we wanted to be in the mental wellness space. About a year and a half later, it's when we were actually trying to raise funds. So we had got some good traction. We had been awarded by Google that year as the best app for personal growth. But we were still struggling to convince investors that, the world needs another mental health app in some ways, right? Because it was COVID, it was just such a crowded space. And at that point, we had our backs to the wall. We had to decide, okay, it's either, we shut this thing down or we just got to find a way to differentiate ourselves. And there were a couple of factors that aligned for us. The first thing was, I think, we started to realize during Pride Month in 2021 that when we ran an A/B test just on our branding, right? And this was a very normal thing to do during Pride Month, where I'm just going to put a rainbow icon. Our conversion rates doubled on the Play Store. But what was really surprising is even after Pride Month ended, we kept the experiment going because we were like, okay, this is great. The results continued. That was the first inkling we had that this doesn't feel right, because every other A/B test or every other experiment we've run has, not led to such a variance. As we started digging deeper, we started to realize that, especially in the US, so by that time, we already had good traction in the US. We were looking at building a US first or a North America first company. We started to realize that, especially in millennials and Gen Z, so Gen Z in the US, 20% were identifying as part of the LGBT community.
Oh, wow.
Even more surprising, and actually not that surprising, but members of the community are almost twice as likely to seek out solutions for mental health because they're a lot more self-aware, a lot more willing to work on themselves. So even when you speak to therapists, almost every therapist has actually had clients from the community. And as we started, processing these data points in our head and doing some maths, we realized that almost 25 to 30% of the mental health market would actually comprise of individuals from the LGBT community. And
25 to
30% of the mental health market, because if you think about it, just the simple maths, right? If 10 to 15% of the audience is queer identifying and they are twice as likely to seek it out,
Okay.
right? So when you think of it just in terms of the market for mental health,
1/4 of it.
exactly. 1/4 to maybe even 30%. So we started then, interviewing some of our users who were already from the community, realizing that, okay, they were already finding some safety in this app. We started, doing some early tests on the product. And then we were pretty convinced at that point because, even at our leadership team level, the rest of the team, we had, members from the community already on the team. And all of us were very, it's very authentic to who we are as individuals to actually solve for this problem. And I think the final nail again was, the same investors or genre of investors that we were struggling to convince earlier. Suddenly the calls were just taking a very different turn. Those investors were willing to back us. So I think that combination of our own intuition, seeing the data, and getting positive feedback from investors, I think all of that came together. And we were
At
like,
the right
let's
time.
do this. Yeah, let's just pivot.
I want to ask you, what are the specific challenges that actually Evolve solves for the LGBTQ plus?
Yeah, so when it comes to mental health for the LGBT community, one of the things we also did at that point, apart from talking to users, is we went through over 100 research papers that were at the intersection of mental health for the LGBT community.
There are so many.
In fact, that's a few. In fact, it's too few. There is a huge gap even in the world of scientific literature when it comes to mental health for the community. What we realized at that point is, firstly, we also need to contribute to more literature. But there was this term called minority stress, right? And if I was to break this down, this is applicable to generally any marginalized or minority group, including, let's say, women in the workplace in India, right? As a minority group for context. What minority stress says is that apart from your everyday day-to-day stressors of, whether it's relationships or workplace stressors, by virtue of being a minority segment, you have these additional stressors, which is constantly playing on your mind, right? So it could be microaggressions that you face at work. The example of women in the workplace in India, when you would hear something like, what, you don't deserve this, or you don't deserve the promotion because I know you'll go on maternity leave, right?
So
now, that's an unconscious bias that's actually coming out as well. And that could be an example of an unconscious microaggression, but you might also have, let's say, someone who's queer identifying walking down the road and getting taunted for their gender expression. And that is also an example of a microaggression. As a woman, you're looking at that and you might not internalize it at that point, but subconsciously you are you are thinking, what is, why am I not represented over here? The same way for the LGBT community, when you're looking at mainstream cinema, mainstream pop culture, and you're seeing, heterosexual couples everywhere, that is also a form of microaggression, right? So there are these microaggressions taking place the whole time. There's a lot of systemic oppression, and yeah, these prejudices, the bullying, the constant trauma, a lot of anxiety that comes from wanting to maybe hide or conceal who you are, right? And imagine this as like this big iron weight that is on your head 24/7. So we really go problem first and also persona first. So if someone's bisexual, right, or identifies as bisexual or pansexual, very often the biggest stressors actually are around dating, because it has a very different set of stressors, right, where it's more about the anxiety around changing your identity, being around others in public. What we've also realized is members of the community, there are a couple of challenges here, right? So one is that even if they have a therapist, now let's take the US market, and they have a therapist because of insurance, but for them to actually get a therapist or a counselor who understands the challenges that come with their identity is extremely rare.
Okay.
So they're most likely to get someone who's not queer. We create these safe environments where the way a therapist would hold space for you. Evolve actually does that. So it'll ask you the right questions, it'll allow you to introspect. And then we also have layers of community and coaching. So we call it content, community, and coaching.
I remember, Anshul, we were discussing this a while back, and you said, we've kind of pivoted to the US market. And that's another reason I was excited to have you here, because made in India, but now being made for the US market. So, what challenges and what were your opportunities that you see in that landscape?
Yeah, maybe just to summarize why we decided to move to the US or be a US focused company is because right from the start, we were very clear that we're going to monetize this in some way, right? So while a lot of the VCs will push you to say that, focus on retention, when we started actually making people pay from the start, we realized that while retention was good in India, willingness to pay was nothing. Right? And whereas in markets like US and UK, we were seeing organic traction even for premium subscribers. So it was very clear for us that at least for the next 5 years, that has to be our focus.
Okay.
The challenges obviously are that, you're not physically located there, you come from a different culture. But I do think there's so much conviction right now amongst Indian founders that we can build for the globe. We've seen it with SaaS companies, and I think the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to prove it with B2C apps as well. It's easy to be data-driven, right? So I think data has become a leveling, it's leveled the playing field globally, right? No matter where you might not know a different culture, you keep experimenting and you'll know what works. The second thing is relentless, user research and user calls. It's easy to then understand, okay, what are some of the cultural nuances? And we also started collaborating then with a lot of content creators and external creators
in
the US. So for example, a lot of our content is built in conjunction or in collaboration with therapists. And then we started working with queer therapists in the US.
Okay, that's interesting. Now I want you, for the next segment, is remove your founder hat.
Okay.
And actually put on your product hat. So Anshul also heads product. And when I opened the Evolve app, I was met with this really, like, a lot of thought has gone into the app. There's these bird chirping sounds, there's a lovely aesthetics to it. I want to talk about this one feature that definitely caught my eye. It was the Explore and the Discover section of the app. Can you share the thought process behind putting out this feature?
Sure. So like you said, we want Evolve to be an experience, right? It's like you walk into your favorite store. That store is never cluttered. It's a very thoughtful sensory experience that goes into what you're seeing first, the colors that you're seeing, the sounds that you're hearing, right? So Evolve becomes that sensory experience, and it's kind of your safe space. The Explore section on the app is designed to really help you work on specific stressors, right? So someone from the community is going through homophobia at home versus someone else is going through a breakup. When you go see a therapist, that experience is going to be very different for the two different stressors, right? So what we've done is we've created these different routines on the app for different stressors, which comprises the Explore section. When people first come on, they can actually search in natural language for anything that they're going through, right? So I can be like, I'm having a fight with my parents. And Evolve will then actually recommend
which is the routine,
the right routine.
Okay.
And those routines are then structured day by day, right? It's designed to be about 5 to 10 minutes of your day.
Every day.
every day for about maybe 2 to 3 weeks to address that problem. And what we do is we create these with a therapist. Now, on the back end, what we've built is actually, think of it like how, a Wix or Canva will help you build things with a drag and drop. We've actually built that as a drag and drop module builder. So let's say for a breakup, I want to ask a user a series of 5 questions. I will work with that therapist and be like, okay, you want to ask 5 questions? What are the kind of questions? And I'll just drag those and build that particular module.
So you made it modular and easy.
Yes.
So that you can actually, it's a scalable solution as
Yes.
you add in more kinds. So I loved, how do you deal with a breakup? And I don't think it's particular to a certain community.
Yeah.
What are some of the features that you actually had to adapt especially for the LGBTQ plus?
Yeah, so something like the explore section was already there. And a lot of other features as well were already there before the pivot, right? It was then how do we actually change the personas that we're addressing and make these features LGBTQ first.
Okay.
So for the discover section, it was then saying, okay, what are the stressors that someone in the community might go through? And what we started doing is then segmenting it into different sub-personas. So someone who's bisexual versus someone who's trans versus someone who's non-binary. What are the top 5 stressors that they might go through? And then really working with therapists from the community to build routines for them. For certain other features, it was then ensuring that there's representation. So, or the meditations, you'll actually have a trans voice, right? Or for things like affirmations, you can actually just choose backgrounds that represent your flag and your identity while you're going through affirmations, right? So that is how we started to actually then make a lot of the features more inclusive and LGBTQ first. Yeah.
How is it that, can you share an example of how you use data to evolve a feature, pun intended, from 0 to 1?
Yeah, so when it comes to a feature, again, this is very, very feature specific. Let's take these routines, right, that I spoke about. And let's assume it's a 2-week routine. Now, if I was to break this down as a mini product, I will first formulate my funnels for the product itself, which is, let's keep the discovery part out, right? Let's assume someone has searched and found a routine that they want. My role is to now ensure that, they complete the 2 weeks. The first thing is for them to actually start the routine, right? So that becomes the first step. The next step is once they start day 1 to complete day 1. Then is come back for day 2, right? And if you break it down, you will have like these, every day becomes a sub step, and that is really how we tackle it. So it's easy to say, oh, my completion rates right now are 15%, I want to take it up to 30%, but unless you break it down into these absolute micro steps, it's really hard to do that. So it starts, with the discovery page itself. When I'm opening the routine, how am I communicating to the user the effectiveness, what they expected to do? How is that first experience? How is the first 2 minutes? And yeah, that's how we really go about it. So, so for example, to start a routine, we've taken it up from, about 70% to almost 90%.
Wow.
But
just giving them, can you give me an example? Do you put like a nudge and say why you should start it? Is that what led?
So I think something like that just comes down to a lot of the UI. So making sure that, you're not cluttered. It's a very clear CTA. You're communicating the value propositions clearly. You're trying to say that, okay, you've clicked on this screen because you're going through a breakup, right? I know you're going through a breakup right now. So I don't want you to go back and then be like, oh, how to manage anxiety in my life or go to something else. I know you're here for a specific reason. I'm going to try and make sure you actually click the next button, right? So I reduce the clutter. I make the space look more inviting for you, safer for you, make it feel like, it's not going to be too hectic on me. It's not going to be too uncomfortable. At the same time, it's going to help me, right? So it's a lot of UI changes over there.
Okay.
But when you start modules, so you start day 1, completing that is then another challenge, right? Because then it's about how the user feels. So we are competing for, space on your phone and the same time that an Instagram is competing for. The moment I make mental health on an app seem heavy, I've lost the user straight away.
Yes.
Right? So a lot of our realizations were then, it's not UI that is going to solve that challenge. You could reduce it from a 10-screen experience to a 5-screen experience, and we realized that also doesn't solve the challenge. So someone is very happy doing 20 screens. The completion rates are not correlated to the number of screens, counterintuitively. But it's how you make the user feel and how easy it is for the user to process their thoughts. So for example, if someone's going through a breakup, And let's say we just give people a blank screen with a journal saying that, what thoughts and emotions are you experiencing right now, it's very hard to actually process it. Whereas if I ask that same question as a multi-select option, where I'm actually writing the thoughts on the screen, saying that I fear that, I'll be lonely for the rest of my life, the user finds that a lot easier, but it's reaching the same objective.
What are some of the steps that you take care for improvement in your product processes?
So we break down the product into different subproducts. So for example, onboarding has its own subproduct. So like, from the time someone opens the app to the time they sign up to the time they do their first action, that remains a mini product. And then every feature tends to be a mini product, right? So firstly, it's just breaking down the product into these mini products using different, tactics or different funnels for each part of these products, each kind of, sub product. The second thing that we do is we have a weekly release that we do. So every week, no matter what happens, we will target at least one experiment. So that experiment might not be a new feature. It might be related to maybe the onboarding of the product. It might be related to the journaling feature. It might be related to something else. But we're constantly making sure that even in a week where a new feature is not going live, we are learning on something.
Okay.
Right. So the product teams, every Friday we will have a release, and then it's about triangulating your user calls. So ensuring that that process is working, your data analytics, of course, and keeping track of what competitors are doing. So we follow a bunch of other products in this space, or even products not in our category, because they're on their own journeys. Most of them have larger product teams than we have. So yeah, it's really seeing their journeys to give us a sense of what's happening, our user feedback and user data.
So one is breaking it down to sub-products, second is continuous experimentation,
Yeah.
and the third is a triangulation between data, competitive research, and as well as
the user feedback. So the data is obviously the micro level and the macro level data.
Great. And you have a vast amount of experience in this field. What would your advice be for upcoming, founders or product managers in this space?
So I think firstly, in the 0 to 1 phase, I compare, my own journey of building this product to directing a movie. You have some vision of what you want to build, but then you just have to go out and do it. You need the help of, whether it's in a movie, you have costume designers, you have set designers, you have your cinematographers. You just have to get all these moving parts and create some magic. Once you've gone from 0 to 1, a very different journey starts, because then it's optimizing things, right? It's relentless optimization, it's relentless experimentation. I think for someone who's aspiring to be a PM, the first thing is keep researching products and see everything as a product. You're walking into a store, see that entire store experience as being a product.
Wow. Okay.
Right? You're just searching or looking, browsing Netflix every night. Put on your product lens on, right? And start thinking about, okay, what would the product manager who's designed this actually, what are they thinking? What do they actually want me to get out of it? Why are they giving me so much choice? So it's really starting to then put your product hat on in literally every aspect of your life. And you will realize that consciously or unconsciously, everything is a product decision. Why does Starbucks actually give you a cup with your name on it? It's part of the product. And you start analyzing that, saying that it's actually personalized, it's making me as a user feel really comfortable, very happy. The shareability improves. How can I do that on my product? Right? So it's really looking at every single aspect. And it's not an easy job, but it's about seeing the bigger picture at times, being relentless with data. I think data is a very important skill set. Being able to get hands-on with SQL, user data, and like I mentioned earlier, being able to join the dots between micro-level data, competitors, everything else.
So joining the dots,
yes,
eventually in your real life as well as in your in your data.
Yeah.
Especially for someone who's building for the LGBTQ plus community, because there are not necessarily that many examples. What would your advice?
Firstly, know why you're building for the LGBT community. It's not that, we are doing it for the sake of doing it, right? We've had a very authentic journey as to why we're doing it. So I think the authenticity and why you're doing it needs to be extremely strong. The second thing is you have to co-create it with the community. There is often a term called rainbow washing. Typically during Pride Month, large corporates are accused of doing rainbow washing. And how do you go below that, right? How do you go one level below that or 10 levels below that, where you genuinely care about the community and everything you're doing? So whether it's the creators we work with, whether it's the features we build keeping a queer persona first in mind, that shows. So when I look at our data now from the US, about 75% of our users in the US identify as part of the community. This is without us aggressively marketing. So clearly, the fact that they share it with others, they share it on their Discord servers, it means that they find that the product is authentic. So it's not just value, right? But they see through when a product is not authentic. So I think keeping it really authentic is absolutely key, and knowing why you're building and what you're building.
A lot of the youngsters want to actually now build purpose-driven products and build products which are socially conscious. What would your actionable advice be to the 25-year-old?
So for someone who wants to do, build for socially inclusive or products, the first thing is it's hard, right? The honest advice is it's much harder to raise money. It's much harder to make money. So I think you first got to figure what you want to do. If you're doing this as a passion project, it's very different to actually, starting this as a full-time business. If you are looking to still start as a full-time business, I think be very clear about how you're going to make money in your business models. I think that is critical. At the end of the day, you can only feel comfortable enough if you're able to make money out of this, or at least sustainable. And you can have those goals as well. So there's so many people who run NGOs which are, not for profit, but they're not cash flow negative. If you do require investment, find the right set of investors, because VCs are not going to back this, right? Regular angel investors might not back something that's socially inclusive. I think the other thing is be very close to your users. So if you're building something, and I know people who were building, let's say, products or services in women's health, or let's say for the LGBT community, you got to be very close to your users and the problem. So if you're not close to that, and you've just read somewhere, a statistic, or this feels close to my heart superficially, don't do it, because it's hard. It's hard.
Okay, that's great. Anjul, we're going to do a rapid fire.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with 2 words that make Evolve unique.
Authentic and love.
Another org in the same space that is creating real change according.
So we really look up to Visa. So it's a mental health chatbot, but they've built from India to the world. They've now raised Series B, and so I think they're really paving the way and giving us confidence that we can do the same.
Biggest misconception about mental health you've encountered?
That you only take care of your mental health when you're feeling low. It's about every day is for mental health.
What everyday behavior do you think that we should normalize when it comes to mental?
Just being honest with sharing things, not concealing, not masking. If you want to laugh, you laugh. If you want to cry, you cry. If you're genuinely feeling in a relationship that something's going against you, just being able to speak it out, right? And just normalizing healthy conversations. I think that's really important.
And one user story that is your favorite?
It's one of our users who first took us to the White House. So she's the CEO of Harlem Pride, which is the largest pride organization in New York. She'd been using Evolve for 6 months, and she was invited to the White House for an event. She took a flyer of Evolve. And a couple of months later, she invited me to be a keynote speaker for Harlem Pride, where I was sharing the stage with the governor of New York.
Wow.
So it was magical that, one of our users has orchestrated all of this.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Anshul.
Thank you.
Has been fantastic. And I think most of all, thank you for your honesty and being authentic today.
I mean, I hope for you, for the listeners, there's some takeaway from this.
Definitely.
I'm always happy to share my story.
Thank you.